Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the war room deep inside Luna Station and looked at the holographic message that had arrived just hours ago. The blue light flickered as Ambassador Veltar's alien face spoke the words that would change everything. The creature's voice came through the translator with perfect clarity, but the tone was wrong somehow, like it was talking to a child who had been very bad. "The Galactic Council has been more than patient with your species," the alien said while its 4 eyes blinked in sequence. 6 months we have waited for Earth to accept the standard integration package. 6 months of delays and excuses and what you call negotiations. This ends now. Jake paused the message and rubbed his tired eyes. 6 months since first contact, and it felt like 6 years. The whole world had changed when the Council ships appeared in Earth's sky. Giant vessels that looked like floating cities had positioned themselves above every major capital. They came in peace, they said. They came to welcome humanity into the galactic community. The integration package sat on Jake's desk like a death sentence, 40 pages of legal text that basically said Earth would give up everything. The planet would become a Council protectorate. 40% of all resources would go to the Council as tribute. 2 billion humans would be relocated to colony worlds that the Council would choose. The remaining population would live under Council oversight with Council laws and Council governors. Dr. Lisa Rodriguez walked into the war room carrying a tablet. Full of data, she looked as tired as Jake felt. For 6 months, she had been studying every piece of information the Council had provided about their empire. What she found made Jake's stomach turn. 847 species, Lisa said as she sat down. Every single one accepted integration within their first year of contact. The pattern is always exactly the same, Jake. First they offer the package noisily, then they apply pressure. Economic blockades, military threats. Then they send the enforcement fleets, and after that it's over. Jake looked at the data on Lisa's tablet. Species after species had followed the same path. The Vakai had resisted for 11 months before surrendering. The Morlock had lasted 8 months. The Finder had given up after just 3 months. When the Council destroyed one of their cities as a demonstration, none of them ever said no, Lisa continued. Not once in 10,000 years of Council expansion. They all eventually accept the package and become part of the Empire. They all give up their freedom for the promise of protection and prosperity. The hologram flickered back to life as Jake restarted the message. Ambassador Veltar's words continued with that same condescending tone. Your species seems to believe it is special, that somehow you are different from the hundreds of civilizations that came before you. This is a common delusion among primitive worlds. We have seen it many times. Jake wanted to punch the hologram, but his fist would just pass through empty air. Primitive worlds. That's what they called Earth, a backward little planet full of savage creatures who didn't understand how the galaxy really worked. The Council had been ruling space for 10,000 years. They had technology that seemed like magic. They had ships that could travel between stars in days. They had weapons that could crack planets in half. Maya Johnson entered the war room, still wearing her diplomatic uniform from the trip to Nexus Prime. She had been Earth's ambassador to the Council for the past 4 months, trying to negotiate better terms. The look on her face told Jake everything he needed to know about how those negotiations had gone. They're done talking, Maya said as she collapsed into a chair. The Council chambers are massive, Jake, a sphere the size of a city, with seats for every member species. 847 chairs arranged in perfect rows. And right in the center where everyone can see it is an empty chair marked with Earth symbol. Above it is a countdown timer. How long? Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. Would be bad. 47 days, Maya replied. If we don't accept the integration package by then, the Council will declare humanity a rogue species. I asked what that meant, and the translator went silent. The other ambassadors just looked away. Whatever happens to rogue species, it's not something they like to talk about. The hologram reached its final message. Ambassador Veltar's 4 eyes fixed on the camera as if it could see through space and time directly into Jake's soul. 47 days human. That is all the time your species has left to make the right choice. Accept integration and join the galactic community, or face the consequences of your arrogance. The council has been patient, but patience has limits. The message ended and the war room fell silent. Jake looked at Lisa and Maya and saw the same expression on their faces that he felt in his own heart. Fear mixed with anger and something else. Something that surprised him, defiance. The president is addressing the United Nations in 2 hours, Maya said. The whole world will be watching. What do we tell them, Jake? Do we surrender? Do we accept the package and hope the council treats the U.S. better than they've treated everyone else? Jake walked to the window and looked out at the earth below. 6 billion humans living their lives not knowing that their entire future hung in the balance. Children playing in parks. Families eating dinner together. Scientists working on new discoveries. Artists creating beauty. Farmers growing food. All of it would change forever if they accepted the council's deal. We tell them the truth, Jake said finally. We tell them that we didn't climb out of caves and build cities and fly to the stars, just to bow down to a bunch of alien bureaucrats. We tell them that Earth doesn't negotiate with empires that demand surrender as the price of peace. 2 hours later, President Elena Vasquez stood before the United Nations General Assembly. The cameras were rolling and the whole world was watching. Her speech would go down in history as the moment humanity chose its path among the stars. My fellow humans, she began, we have been given a choice. Submit to alien rule or face their wrath. But I say to you today that some choices are not really choices at all. We didn't survive ice ages and plagues and world wars just to hand over our freedom to strangers from space. We didn't build democracy and human rights and the rule of law just to throw it all away for the promise of protection. The president paused and looked directly into the camera. Humanity refuses to negotiate. We will not accept the integration package. We will not surrender our sovereignty. We will not relocate our people to alien worlds. We will chart our own course among the stars, or we will die trying. The response from the council was immediate. Within hours of the president's speech, massive ships began appearing at the edge of the solar system. 200 vessels formed a blockade around Earth's sun. The siege had begun. Captain Ben Carter stood on the bridge of the ESV Defiance and watched the enemy ships through the viewscreen. 3 weeks had passed since the council blockade began, and the sight never got easier. 200 alien vessels hung in space like deadly stars, forming a perfect sphere around Earth's solar system. Nothing got in and nothing got out. The Defiance was humanity's most advanced warship, but compared to the council fleet, it looked like a toy. Ben's ship was 300 meters long and carried a crew of 200. The smallest council vessel was twice that size. The largest ones were so big, they had their own gravity and atmosphere. Cities floating in space with enough firepower to turn planets into dust. Captain, called out Lieutenant Kate Morgan from the sensor station, the council ships are moving again. Same pattern as yesterday. They're pushing more asteroids toward Earth's orbit. Ben nodded and tried to keep his face calm for the crew. The council wasn't just blockading Earth. They were slowly nudging asteroids and space debris toward the planet's path. Not enough, too. 'Cause immediate impact, but enough to send a message. Submit or face extinction, death by inches rather than sudden destruction. Any word from Admiral Morrison? Ben asked. Still no response from Luna Station, sir, Kate replied. The council is jamming all communications beyond the asteroid belt. We're on our own out here. Ben looked at his tactical display showing the positions of Earth's entire fleet. 30 ships total, including the Defiance. Corvettes and frigates. And destroyers built for patrol duties and asteroid mining. They had nuclear weapons and railguns and enough firepower to level a city. Against the council armada, they might as well be throwing rocks. Dr. Lisa Rodriguez had been right about the council's pattern. Economic pressure first. Then military threats, then overwhelming force. But something was wrong with the pattern this time. The council fleet wasn't advancing. They were just sitting there waiting for something. Ben had been expecting the final assault for days, but it never came on Earth Admiral Jake Morrison was asking the same questions. The war room in Luna Station had become the nerve center for humanity's defense. Maps and screens showed the positions of every ship in the solar system. The Council vessels formed a perfect blockade, but they weren't moving inward. They were holding position and waiting. "It doesn't make sense," Jake said to Lisa as they studied the tactical display. "They have overwhelming superiority. They could end this in hours. Why are they just sitting there?" Lisa pulled up her analysis of intercepted Council communications. The alien languages were complex, but the translation software was getting better at reading their intent. What it revealed was surprising. "They're arguing," Lisa said. "The Council commanders are having heated debates about how to proceed. Apparently, they've never faced a species that refused integration outright. Their entire military doctrine assumes eventual submission." Jake leaned forward to read the translated messages. High Counselor Zethkari was demanding immediate action. Prime Kexel wanted to try economic pressure first. Other council members were worried about setting a precedent that might encourage other species to resist. For the first time in 10,000 years, the council was facing something they had never encountered. Complete defiance. Colonel Sam Wright entered the war room carrying a sealed briefcase. His face was grim, but his eyes held a spark of something. That might have been hope. Sam had been working on humanity's response to the blockade. "A plan so desperate it might actually work. Operation Broken Chain is ready," Sam announced. "We've identified 3 council outposts in nearby systems. Lightly defended supply stations that support their expansion fleets. While they're sitting here debating our fate, we hit them hard and fast." Jake looked at the plan Sam had developed. It was insane. 30 human ships against an empire that controlled half the galaxy, but it wasn't really about winning. It was about sending a message. Humanity would fight back regardless of the odds. "The Council thinks we're primitives," Sam continued. "They've been conquering civilizations for 10,000 years using the same tactics. Overwhelming force and the threat of extinction. But they've never faced an enemy that understands asymmetric warfare. They've never fought humans." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. 3 strike forces would hit the Council outposts simultaneously. The attacks would be fast and brutal, using tactics the aliens had never seen. Nuclear weapons deployed at close range. Ramming attacks, suicide runs. Everything humanity had learned from centuries of warfare against their own species. Ben Carter received his orders 12 hours later. The Defiance would lead Strike Force Alpha against the Council outpost at Proxima Centauri. 10 ships total, including 2 destroyers and 8 corvettes. Their target was a supply station that supported Council expansion into the Outer Rim territories. "This is probably a one-way trip," Ben told his crew over the ship's communication system. "The Council has technology we can barely understand. They have ships that can travel faster than light and weapons that can crack moons. But they've never fought an enemy that refuses to surrender. They've never faced humans who choose death over slavery." The 3 strike forces launched simultaneously, using different routes to avoid Council detection. Ben watched Earth shrink behind them as the Defiance accelerated toward the edge of the solar system. The Council blockade ships didn't react. They were still focused on the siege and hadn't noticed the small human vessels slipping away. The journey to Proxima Centauri took 18 hours using humanity's fastest engines. The Council outpost appeared on sensors as they approached the system. It was smaller than expected, but still massive by human standards. A cylindrical structure 3 kilometers long with docking bays for dozens of ships. Energy readings suggested it was lightly defended, just as intelligence had predicted. "All ships, this is Captain Carter," Ben broadcast to his strike force. "Remember the plan? Fast and hard. Nuclear weapons at close range. Don't give them time to react. Don't give them time to call for help. We go in shooting and we don't stop until it's over." The attack began at 0800 hours ship time. 10 human vessels screamed into the Proxima system at maximum acceleration. The Council station's defenses activated, but they were designed to repel conventional attacks. Coordinated assault formations. and long-range engagements. They weren't prepared for humanity's approach. The Defiance led the charge straight at the station's main hull. Ben's weapons officer fired nuclear missiles at point-blank range, while the other ships attacked from different angles. The Council defenders tried to respond, but human tactics were completely alien to them. Ramming attacks, suicide runs. Weapons deployed so close that the attacking ships were damaged by their own explosions. In 18 minutes it was over. The Council outpost was burning wreckage drifting in space. 3 human ships were destroyed, and 2 more were badly damaged, but the mission was complete. For the first time in galactic history, the Council had suffered military losses from a primitive species. The other 2 strike forces reported similar success. The outposts at Volf 359 and Barnard Star were completely destroyed. 12 Council vessels were eliminated along with their crews. The damage to the Council's military was minimal, but the psychological impact was enormous. Councilor Zethkari convened an emergency session of the full Council. Representatives from 847 species gathered in the Great Chamber on Nexus Prime, the countdown timer above. Earth's empty chair continued its relentless march toward zero, but suddenly that seemed less important than the impossible reports coming from the front lines. How? Zethkari demanded. How does a primitive species destroy 3 of our outposts? How do they penetrate our defenses? How do they defeat technology that is thousands of years more advanced than anything they possess? Prime Kexel stood to address the Council. His enforcement fleet had been preparing for the final assault on Earth, but now those plans were in doubt. Their tactics are unlike anything we have encountered. They attack without regard for their own survival. They use weapons at ranges that would destroy their own ships. They fight like creatures with nothing to lose. The debate that followed would reshape the galaxy. For 10,000 years, the Council had ruled through the myth of their invincibility. No species had ever successfully resisted their expansion. No primitive world had ever drawn Council blood. But humanity had done both in a single day. News of the attacks spread through the galactic communication networks faster than light. Species that had been conquered centuries ago heard the impossible reports and began to whisper among themselves. The humans had fought back. The humans had won. The Council could bleed. On Earth, Admiral Jake Morrison received the mission reports with a mixture of pride and terror. Operation Broken Chain had succeeded beyond their wildest hopes, but the response would be swift and terrible. The Council would not forgive this insult to their authority. They'll come for us now, Jake told his staff, all of them. Every ship in the Council fleet. They can't let this stand or their entire empire will collapse. But even as he spoke, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Humanity had proven they could fight back. They had shown the galaxy that the Council was not invincible. Whatever came next, they would face it as free people who had chosen their own destiny. Among the stars, the impossible had happened, and the galaxy was watching. Prime Kexel's enforcement fleet, the most feared military force in known space, was retreating from human territory. Ships that had conquered hundreds of worlds were pulling back to defensive positions after suffering losses they had never experienced before. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the command center of Luna Station reading reports that seemed like science fiction. The Council's blockade fleet was breaking apart. Some ships were returning to their home systems. Others were requesting reinforcements. The perfect sphere of vessels that had surrounded Earth for weeks was developing gaps. Dr. Lisa Rodriguez burst into the command center carrying a data tablet that contained the most important intelligence humanity had ever received. For months she had been analyzing Council communications, and what she had discovered would change everything. The Council isn't what they pretend to be, Lisa announced. They're not some unified galactic empire. They're a protection racket that got too big for anyone to stop. Jake, you need to see this. The data on Lisa's tablet showed the true structure of the Council's empire. 847 member species, but only 150 of them held any real power. The rest were subjects. Slaves in all but name. Their resources were stripped away. Their populations were controlled. Their freedoms were crushed under the weight of council authority. Look at the Vakai, Lisa said, pointing to the data. They joined the council 500 years ago. Since then, 60% of their population has been relocated to mining colonies. Their homeworld produces raw materials that get shipped to council core worlds. They see almost none of the profits. Jake studied the information with growing amazement. The Morlack had been reduced to agricultural serfs growing food for other species. The Finder manufactured weapons they were not allowed to own. Dozens of civilizations had been turned into specialized labor forces serving the Council's needs. The member species aren't partners, Lisa continued. They're resources. The Council maintains power through the myth that membership brings prosperity and protection. But the reality is exploitation on a galactic scale. News of humanity's resistance was spreading through underground networks that Lisa had only recently discovered. Species that had been conquered centuries ago were beginning to ask questions they had never dared voice before. If the humans could fight back, why couldn't they on the mining world of Vakai? Prime workers had stopped production at 3 major facilities. It was the first organized resistance in 500 years. The local council overseers were calling for military intervention, but the enforcement fleets were busy dealing with the human problem. The agricultural world of Morlock 7 was experiencing similar unrest. Farmers were refusing to meet their quotas. Food shipments to council core worlds were being delayed or sabotaged. Regional governors were sending panicked messages to Nexus Prime requesting immediate assistance. Captain Ben Carter had become something of a legend after the destruction of the Proxima Centauri outpost. His ship, the ESV Defiance, was being hailed as a symbol of human courage across the galaxy. But Ben was more interested in the tactical reports coming from intelligence networks. They're afraid, Ben told his crew during a briefing. The Council has been ruling through intimidation for 10,000 years. They've never faced real resistance. Their entire military doctrine is based on overwhelming force against inferior opponents. They don't know how to fight an enemy that refuses to surrender. The proof of Ben's words came during the battle for the asteroid mining station at Ceres. A small council patrol had attempted to secure the facility as a forward base. Ben's ships had responded with typical human tactics: close-range nuclear attacks, ramming maneuvers, weapons deployed at distances that would damage their own vessels. The council ships had superior technology, but they fought like they were conducting a parade. Perfect formations, coordinated movements, long-range engagements designed to minimize risk. When the humans closed to knife-fighting distance, the alien tactics fell apart. They're not soldiers, Ben realized as he watched the tactical replay. They're police. They're used to dealing with species that submit when faced with superior force. They've never had to fight a real war. The battle for Ceres lasted 6 hours and ended with the destruction of the Council Patrol. No human ships were lost, though. Several were damaged. The asteroid belt was still in human hands, and the Council's attempt to establish a forward base had failed completely. On Nexus Prime, the Council's ruling chamber was in chaos. High Counselor Zethkari faced the assembled representatives of 847 species, but for the first time in his career he was not in complete control. Reports of rebellion were coming in from dozens of worlds. The humans have infected the galaxy with their madness, Zethkari declared. Species that have been loyal for centuries are now questioning our authority. This cannot be allowed to continue. Sage Nimara, the Council's oldest advisor, stood to address the chamber. She had served for over 1,000 years and had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. Her words carried weight that even Zethkari could not ignore. We face an existential threat, Nimara said. Not from human military power, but from human ideas. They have shown the galaxy that the Council can be resisted, that our authority is not absolute, that our power is not unlimited. The debate that followed revealed the cracks in the Council's foundation. Species that had been silent for centuries began to speak. The Vakai representative demanded an explanation for the mining quotas. The Morlock ambassador questioned the food requisitions. The Thunder delegate asked why they were forbidden to own the weapons they manufactured. 10,000 years of order, Zethkari shouted. 10,000 years of peace and prosperity. And you would throw it all away for the wild promises of a primitive species. But the questions had been asked and could not be unasked. The representatives returned to their homeworlds carrying doubts that spread like wildfire. The myth of council invincibility was cracking, and through the cracks leaked the possibility of something different. Admiral Jake Morrison received a message that changed everything. It came through encrypted channels from a source that identified itself only as the Liberation Network. The message was simple, but its implications were staggering. 12 species have formally withdrawn from the Galactic Council. They are declaring their independence and requesting human assistance in establishing defensive alliances. The revolution has begun. Jake stared at the message in disbelief. 12 species. Entire civilizations with billions of inhabitants were breaking free from council control. The domino effect that humanity had started with Operation Broken Chain was accelerating beyond anyone's wildest dreams. The 12 rebel species were scattered across the galaxy, but they had one thing in common. They had been among the earliest conquests of the Council. They had spent centuries as subjects and slaves. Now they were choosing freedom over security and independence over prosperity. Dr. Lisa Rodriguez analyzed the rebel species and found patterns that made sense. They were all technologically advanced civilizations that had been reduced to resource extraction or manufacturing. They had the infrastructure to support independence but had been forbidden to develop military capabilities. They need teachers, Lisa told Jake. They have the resources to build fleets and armies, but they don't know how to fight. The Council has kept them dependent for so long they've forgotten how to defend themselves. Jake realized the opportunity and the danger. Humanity could provide the knowledge and tactics these species needed to break free. But doing so would make Earth the center of a galactic rebellion against an empire that had ruled for 10,000 years. High Counselor Zethkari saw the same opportunity and danger from the opposite perspective. If the rebellion succeeded, the Council would collapse. If it failed, the rebels would be crushed and the Council's authority would be restored. But there was a third option that terrified him more than either alternative. We must destroy the humans completely, Zethkari told his inner circle. Not just defeat them, not just conquer them, exterminate them, every last one. If the human species continues to exist, they will inspire others to rebel. They will spread their poison of freedom and democracy across the galaxy. The Council's response was swift and terrible. The largest military force in galactic history began assembling at staging areas throughout the Empire, 5,000 ships, weapons capable of cracking planets, troops equipped with technology that could turn solar systems into graveyards. But even as the Council prepared for genocide, the rebellion grew stronger. The 12 independent species were joined by others. Underground networks that had operated in secret for centuries came into the open. Resistance movements that had been crushed decades ago rose from the ashes. Captain Ben Carter stood on the bridge of the Defiance and watched the tactical display showing friendly contacts throughout the galaxy. Green dots representing rebel fleets and resistance cells and free species who had chosen to stand against the Council's tyranny. We're not alone anymore, Ben told his crew. When this started, we were 30 ships against an empire. Now we're the spark that lit a fire across the galaxy. The Council wanted to make an example of us. The Council's genocidal decree had backfired in ways that High Counselor Zethkari never could have imagined. Within hours of the announcement, 63 species had openly declared their support for humanity's right to exist. The galaxy was splitting apart along lines that had been drawn by 10,000 years of oppression. Colonel Sam Wright stood in the newly established war room of the Free Species Alliance and watched the tactical display that showed friendly contacts across half the galaxy. What had started as humanity's desperate gamble had become a full-scale revolution against the Council's authority. 63 species and counting, Sam reported to Admiral Jake Morrison. They're not just declaring neutrality. They're actively joining the rebellion. The Vakai have pledged their mining fleets. The Morlock are offering their agricultural worlds as supply bases. The Thinder want to share their weapons technology. Jake studied the intelligence reports with amazement. The Rebel Alliance was growing faster than anyone had predicted. Species that had been conquered centuries ago were rediscovering their courage. Civilizations that had been reduced to resource extraction were remembering what it meant to be free, but the most important development was happening on the military front. Human advisors were spreading across rebel worlds, teaching guerrilla warfare and asymmetric tactics. The Council's military doctrine, unchanged for millennia, was proving helpless. Against human innovation. Captain Ben Carter had been promoted to admiral and given command of the rebel fleet's main strike force. His ship, the ESV Defiance, had become the flagship of a growing armada that included vessels from dozens of species. The diversity of the fleet was its greatest strength. Every species fights differently, Ben explained to his multinational crew. The Vakai use their mining equipment as weapons. The Morlock turn their cargo haulers into missile platforms. The Thinder have developed stealth technology the Council has never seen. When we combine our different approaches, we become something the Council can't counter. The proof of Ben's words came during the siege of the Council stronghold at Rigel 7. The fortress had been built to withstand conventional assault from space, orbital bombardment, mass fleet attacks, coordinated strikes by overwhelming numbers of ships. It was not prepared for humanity's approach to warfare. The attack began with Vakai miners using their industrial equipment to tunnel through the planet's crust. While Council defenders watched the skies for incoming fleets, human engineers were planting nuclear charges deep underground. The fortress's shields were designed to repel attacks from above, not from below. Morlock cargo vessels converted into missile platforms provided covering fire while Thinder stealth ships slipped through the defensive perimeter. Human tactics coordination, combined with alien technology and creativity, proved unstoppable. The siege that should have taken months was over in 3 days. Dr. Lisa Rodriguez had made a breakthrough discovery that changed everything. The Council's technology was not actually superior to what rebel species could produce. It was just standardized. The Empire had succeeded through conformity, not advancement. They've been using the same designs for thousands of years, Lisa explained to the Alliance leadership. Their ships, their weapons, their tactics. Everything is based on patterns that worked in the past. They never innovate because innovation leads to unpredictability, and unpredictability threatens their control. The Rebel Alliance represented everything the Council feared most: diversity, creativity, innovation, species working together by choice, rather than compulsion, ideas flowing freely instead of being controlled by central authority. It was chaos in the best possible sense. Maya Johnson had emerged as the diplomatic leader of the rebellion. Her experience with Council politics made her invaluable as she negotiated with fence-sitting species and coordinated the diverse Rebel Alliance. Her office in the former Council embassy on Luna Station had become the unofficial capital of the Free Galaxy. "We're not trying to replace the Council with another empire," Maya explained to a gathering of Rebel ambassadors. "We're trying to create something that has never existed before. A galactic community based on cooperation rather than domination. A federation of free species working together for mutual benefit." The concept was radical and terrifying to species that had known only hierarchy and control for centuries. But it was also inspiring. For the first time in galactic history, civilizations could imagine a future where they controlled their own destiny. The Council's response grew increasingly desperate as their empire crumbled. They began using weapons of mass destruction against their own former colonies. Orbital bombardment of rebel worlds. Biological weapons designed to target specific species. Terror tactics that revealed the true nature of their rule, but every atrocity only accelerated the defections. Species that had remained neutral were horrified by the Council's actions. Military commanders who had served the Empire for decades began to question their loyalty. The Council's authority was collapsing under the weight of its own brutality. Prime Kexthal died during the battle for the Council. Fortress at Vega Prime, his enforcement fleet, the pride of the Empire, was annihilated by human-trained rebel forces, using tactics he could not comprehend. The greatest military commander in Council history was defeated by primitives who refused to fight by the rules. The loss of Kexthal sent shockwaves through the Council's military hierarchy. Commanders who had never known defeat were facing enemies they could not understand. Species they had conquered centuries ago were teaching them lessons in warfare they had never learned. High Counselor Zethkari stood in the council chambers on Nexus Prime and looked at the empty seats where representatives of rebel species had once sat. More than half the chamber was vacant. The countdown timer above Earth's seat had long since expired, but somehow the humans were still defying Council authority. "How did it come to this?" Zethkari asked Sage Nimara. "We offered them everything. Membership in the galactic community, access to our technology, protection from the dangers of space, and they threw it all away for the illusion of freedom." Nimara looked at the empty chamber and saw the end of an era. "We offered them security in exchange for their liberty. We thought that was a fair trade because it always had been before. But the humans showed the galaxy that some things are worth more than safety. Some things are worth dying for." The siege of Nexus Prime began on a Tuesday morning Galactic Standard Time. The Council's capital world was surrounded by the largest rebel fleet in history. Ships from dozens of species working together with human tactical coordination. The symbol of Council authority was under direct assault. Admiral Ben Carter commanded the siege from his flagship, but he was not alone. The Defiance was part of a multinational fleet that represented the best of what the galaxy could achieve when species worked together by choice rather than compulsion. "All ships," this is Admiral Carter Ben broadcast to the assembled fleet. "Today, we're not fighting for conquest or domination. We're fighting for the right of every species to determine their own future. We're fighting to show the galaxy that cooperation is stronger than control." The battle for Nexus Prime was unlike anything in galactic history. The Council's defenses were formidable, but they were designed to repel conventional attacks. The rebel fleet used human tactics combined with alien technology in ways that no military doctrine had ever anticipated. Vakai miners used their industrial equipment to crack the planet's defensive satellites. Morla cargo vessels deployed kinetic weapons that turned orbital debris into artillery shells. Thinder stealth ships slipped through the defensive perimeter and struck at targets the Council never saw coming. The siege lasted 18 days and ended not with a final battle, but with a surrender. The Council's remaining loyalists, seeing the writing on the wall, overthrew High Counselor Zethkari and sued for peace. The galactic capital fell without a shot being fired in the final assault. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the abandoned council chambers looking at the empty seats that had once held absolute power over 847 species. The challenge now was not winning the war, but building something better in its place. "We destroyed their empire," Jake said to his staff. "Now we have to create something to replace it. Something that won't become what we just defeated." The irony was not lost on him. Humanity's refusal to negotiate had forced the galaxy into the largest negotiation in its history. Every species would have to decide what kind of future they wanted. Every civilization would have to choose between freedom and security. Maya Johnson addressed the first session of the Galactic Federation from the former council chambers. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered to witness the birth of something unprecedented in galactic history. A government based on consent rather than conquest. "We gather not as conquerors and conquered, but as equals," Maya declared. "Not as rulers and subjects, but as partners in building a better future." The old council demanded submission. The new federation asks only for cooperation. The transition was not easy. Species that had been controlled for centuries struggled with the concept of self-governance. Some worlds descended into chaos as ancient rivalries resurfaced. Others faced economic collapse without council support structures. The price of freedom was proving higher. 5 years had passed since the fall of the Galactic Council, and the galaxy was a different place. Admiral Jake Morrison, retired now, sat on his porch in the mountains of Colorado, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The old man who had once commanded humanity's desperate defense against an empire now spent his mornings feeding birds and reading reports from across the stars. The reports were a mixture of triumph and chaos that perfectly captured the new galactic order. The Vakai had established 3 new universities, and their enrollment was the highest in their recorded history. The Morlech were hosting the first interspecies cultural festival in their sector. The Finder had developed medical technology that was revolutionizing healthcare across dozens of worlds, but there were also problems. A trade dispute between the Kaleri and the Zephyrions had escalated into a border skirmish. The former council world of Titan Prime was experiencing political upheaval as different factions competed for control. Economic inequality on some worlds had led to protests and calls for Federation intervention. Jake sipped his coffee and smiled at the complexity of it all. The galaxy was messier now than it had ever been under council rule. There were arguments and disputes, and sometimes even small wars between member species. Democracy was loud and chaotic and often inefficient, but it was free. Dr. Lisa Rodriguez had become the Federation's first Secretary General, and she was discovering that governing free species was infinitely more difficult than studying oppressed ones. Her office in the former council chambers was constantly busy with delegations and petitions and complaints from worlds that were learning to govern themselves. The hegemony worlds want to increase tariffs on Outer Rim imports, her aide reported during the morning briefing. The Outer Rim worlds are threatening to withdraw from the trade agreement. The core worlds are demanding Federation intervention to prevent economic disruption. Lisa nodded and added the dispute to her already overflowing schedule. Economic disagreements were a constant feature of Federation politics. Species that had been forced to trade under council regulations were now free to negotiate their own deals. The result was a complex web of agreements and disputes that kept the Federation bureaucracy working overtime. What about the situation on Kepler 7? Lisa asked. Still ongoing, her aide replied. The indigenous population wants to limit immigration from off-world. The refugee communities are claiming discrimination. Both sides are demanding Federation support for their position. These were the kinds of problems the old council had solved with simple decrees. Indigenous populations had no rights under council law. Refugee communities were relocated wherever the council decided. Immigration was controlled by central authority rather than local preference. The Federation's approach was messier, but more. Just. Captain Ben Carter, now Admiral of the Federation, fleet patrolled the space lanes in a very different kind of ship than the old ESV Defiance. The FFS Liberty was larger and more advanced, but it carried diplomats and aid workers as often as it carried weapons. The Federation fleet's primary mission was peacekeeping rather than warfare. Admiral, we have a situation developing in the Deneb sector, his communications officer reported. 2 species are disputing ownership of an asteroid field rich in rare minerals. Both sides have deployed mining fleets and tensions are escalating. Ben studied the tactical display showing the positions of the competing fleets. Under council rule, this kind of dispute would have been settled by whoever had more political influence with the central authority. The Federation's approach was more complex but ultimately fairer. Open a channel to both fleets, Ben ordered. Remind them that Federation law requires peaceful resolution of resource disputes. Offer our mediation services, and make it clear that any aggressive action will result in Federation intervention. The Liberty approached the disputed asteroid field flying the flag of the Federation. The ship's mission was not to impose a solution but to facilitate negotiation between the competing parties. It was a slower process than council decree, but it was more likely to produce a lasting peace. Maya Johnson had established the Federation diplomatic corps to handle the complex web of relationships between member species. Her headquarters on Earth had become a center for cultural exchange and international cooperation. The building was always busy with delegations trying to resolve disputes or negotiate new agreements. The Andromedan colonies want to establish a defensive alliance, her deputy reported. They're concerned about pirate activity in their sector, but the Centauri worlds see the alliance as a potential threat to their own security. Maya scheduled meetings with both groups to discuss their concerns. Under the old council, such alliances would have been forbidden without central approval. The Federation allowed member species to make their own security arrangements as long as they did not threaten others. The irony was not lost on her. Humanity's refusal to negotiate with the Council had created a galaxy where negotiation was constant. Every trade agreement had to be discussed. Every territorial dispute had to be mediated. Every cultural conflict had to be resolved through the dialogue rather than decree. Colonel Sam Wright had founded the Federation Military Academy, where officers from dozens of species learned to work together in defense of freedom. The curriculum included human tactical innovations, but also incorporated lessons from every member civilization. The goal was to create military leaders who understood cooperation rather than conquest. The first graduating class includes representatives from 47 species, Sam reported to the Federation Council. They've learned to fight together not as separate armies, but as a unified force dedicated to protecting democratic values. The Academy's graduates were already making a difference. Across the galaxy, former enemies were serving together on integrated crews. Species that had been at war for centuries were learning to trust each other. The Federation military was becoming a symbol of unity rather than division. Dr. Rodriguez addressed the fifth annual Federation Assembly from the great chamber that had once held the Council's throne. Representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered to debate the issues facing their growing democracy. The chamber was louder and more chaotic than it had ever been under Council rule, but it was also more alive. 5 years ago, we chose freedom over security, Lisa declared. We chose the right to make our own mistakes over the guarantee of someone else's success. Today, we can see the results of that choice. The galaxy is messier, but it is also more creative. It is louder, but it is also more just. The challenges facing the Federation were real and serious. Some worlds struggled with the transition to self-governance. Economic inequality remained a problem on many planets. Cultural conflicts sometimes escalated into violence. Piracy and crime had increased in some sectors where Council enforcement had previously maintained order, but there were also unprecedented achievements. Scientific cooperation between species had led to breakthroughs in medicine and technology. Cultural exchange had produced new forms of art and literature. Trade agreements negotiated freely rather than imposed by authority had created prosperity that was more widely shared. The Vayakai had used their freedom to explore their own solar system for the first time in centuries. The Morlack had developed new agricultural techniques that were feeding hungry worlds across the galaxy. The Finder had turned their weapons factories into research centers working on peaceful applications of their technology. Admiral Jake Morrison finished his coffee and walked back into his house to read the morning dispatches from Earth's diplomatic missions. The reports were full of the usual mixture of problems and progress that characterized the Federation. A successful trade negotiation here, a cultural misunderstanding there. Small steps forward and occasional steps back, his grandson visited. That afternoon full of questions about the war and what it had been like to fight the Council. Jake tried to explain that the fighting had been the easy part. The real challenge had been building something better to replace what they had destroyed. Why did you refuse to negotiate with them, Grandpa? The boy asked. Maybe you could have worked out a better deal. Jake looked out at the mountains and thought about the price of freedom. Because some things aren't negotiable, he said finally. The right to choose your own government. The right to control your own resources. The right to determine your own future. Those things don't have a price. The Federation was not perfect. Democracy never was. But it was free, and that freedom belonged to everyone who chose to embrace it. The galaxy had learned that cooperation was possible without coercion. That diversity was a strength rather than a weakness. That the chaos of freedom was preferable to the order of oppression. Earth remained the symbolic center of the Federation, but it was no longer alone among the stars. Humanity had taught the galaxy to resist tyranny, and in return the galaxy had taught humanity to embrace cooperation. The species that had refused to negotiate had become the architects of the greatest negotiation in galactic history. The sun set over the Colorado Mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Somewhere among those stars, hundreds of species were working together to build a better future. They argued and disagreed and sometimes fought, but they did it as free people making their own choices.